A remarkable controversy has erupted over Amy Coney Barrett's statements in the abortion case from several days ago. And the controversy reveals the corrupt and evil core that is at the heart of modern progressivism. Now, Amy Coney Barrett very almost innocuously raised a question. The left, this is Elizabeth Prelogar speaking for the Biden administration, the Solicitor General, kept talking about forced pregnancy. And Amy Coney Barrett said, in effect, she said, look, I admit that pregnancy involves a sort of infringement upon the idea of bodily autonomy, which is to say that your absolute right to have a say over whatever happens around or even inside your body. But she said, we live at a time when there are adoption agencies that are desperately looking for children. Now, Amy Coney Barrett is obviously not speaking here theoretically. She has had, 5 children of her own. They've adopted 2, in fact, from Haiti, I believe. And Amy Coney Barrett said, at a time when we also have these laws, they're so-called safe haven laws. And what they mean is that if you don't want to raise your child, you can, in a sense, shield yourself from criminal liability, from being charged with negligence. You just essentially put the child up for adoption, and it will be raised by someone who wants it. So Amy Coney Barrett's point here, and it's really an unanswerable point, is that when you're talking about the forced pregnancy, all that you mean is that the inconvenience on the one side that's involved is that the woman doesn't have to raise a child she doesn't want to raise, isn't saddled with lifetime obligations, isn't responsible for financial burdens that she's unable to bear or even know how she can bear in the future. None of that. The woman merely has to carry the pregnancy to term, at which point the adoption agency sort of steps in. So balancing, if you will, the inconvenience to the mother versus the child's right to life. I mean, think about it. This is its whole future, its whole destiny, its chance to live in the first place. Amy Coney Barrett's point is, what are you saying? And Elizabeth Prelogar, of course, spouted a bunch of incomprehensible nonsense, but the leftists picked this theme up, and I find it really fascinating. Here's an article in Vogue magazine that says that this was a, quote, moment of repugnance. This woman was just repelled by Amy Coney Barrett even bringing up adoption. And I'm going to just read because it gives a window into the psychology of the left. As a queer woman hoping to start a family in the not-too-distant future, I felt a particular sense of unease listening to Barrett frame adoption in this way. And she goes, my right to parent as a queer person should not be remotely connected to another person being forced to carry their pregnancy to term. So really what she's saying is, even the act of having the child is too much to ask of the woman. Let's think about it. The woman has participated with a man in creating this child. No one made them do it. They've done it on their own and by their own actions. And yet it's too much to ask that this pregnancy be delivered. In the New York Times, Elizabeth Spears writes an essay. She's an adoptee herself, but she says that adoption can be, quote, infinitely more difficult, expensive, dangerous, and potentially traumatic than terminating a pregnancy in the early stage. Now, she's looking, perhaps, and I would agree, that if you're talking about just walking in and out of an abortion clinic, as opposed to, let's say, carrying the pregnancy to term for 9 months, technically speaking, this is true. But she goes on very interestingly to talk about the fact that mothers who give up their children experience heartbreak over the years. Where's my child? Who's raising my child? Well, yeah, but what would the other option have been? Don't you think that the same mother would experience regrets over, I killed my kid will never see the light of day, I gave birth to this kid, I conceived this child, but then I refused to raise it. And then she talks, and she has the chutzpah to talk about the difficulties faced by adoptive children, which actually, by the way, are real. Adoptive children often experience an identity crisis and this sort of thing. But again, compared to what? Which adoptive child would say, I'm experiencing an identity crisis. I wish I had been raised by my own birth parent. I'm happy to be raised by someone else. But you know what? My first choice is basically to have a pair of forceps smash my head. I don't think that's going to be a common thought on the part of adoptees. Now, here's an adoptee, by the way, Rebecca Carroll, who has apparently written a book about this. She's evidently Black, and her book is called Surviving the White Gaze. And this really angered me because she goes, quote, this is her story about, quote, the enduring trauma of being adopted into a white family. And I thought, well, did the white family mistreat you in some way? It turns out, no. There's no mistreatment at all. The trauma is the fact that she, a Black child, was raised by a white family. And I'm thinking to myself, if it's enduring trauma for you to be adopted by a white family, you might consider that the Black family, that the Black parents that gave birth to you didn't want you. And two, there were evidently no Black couples that chose to adopt you. The white family stepped in, so aren't you grateful that somebody stepped in? Aren't you grateful that some family raised you? And so this idea of turning around and bashing the process and bashing Amy Coney Barrett, this is Rebecca Carroll, she has, quote, damaged the psyches of her own Black adoptive children by even raising the topic. So I think this is the ghoulish philosophy that is modern progressivism. In a sense, what they're saying is that abortion, including late-term abortion, I mean, you talk about the trauma of having a child. What about the trauma of going through a partial birth abortion, a late-term abortion? That's a hideous trauma, but the left defends it relentlessly. They want to leave that option open to women. They're not worried about the fact that this can be a difficult, dangerous, even a health-challenging choice for the mother herself. Not to mention a sort of a death sentence for the fetus that's been conceived. I think what we see here is that is a kind of sad insider perspective into the depraved heart that is modern liberalism.